Stephanie Musho is a human rights lawyer. She joins us now in the studio. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
You know, Ndu has been telling us about traffic.
Yeah.
You've come in at this time of the morning.
Yeah.
How is it getting here?
Actually, it was pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I didn't use the expressway, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was pretty fast.
Just using Mombasa Road.
Just Mombasa Road.
See, the expressway works. See? Expressway works
when you use the down road.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante, it's good to be
you
here.
We're going to talk about the East Africa Community's Sexual and Reproductive Health Bill of 2021, and you'll tell us a lot more about it. But tell us what you do.
Well, I am, as you said, a human rights lawyer working around gender and reproductive justice. So I'm very passionate about those issues. I was a teenage mom myself, and so I think that's what galvanized my interest into, championing sexual and reproductive health. But when I'm not working, I'm doing fun things with my daughter, like TikTok videos.
You're mothering.
I'm mothering, so that's what I do. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm assuming that I'm not assuming. So the East Africa Community Sexual and Reproductive Health Bill is before IALA.
Right.
Who took it there? Why is it there? Why is it important that it goes to the East African Legislative Assembly?
Yeah. So the bill was sponsored by Honorable Kennedy Mukulia. This is a South Sudanese national representing, South Sudan at the Legislative Assembly. If you look at the issue of sexual and reproductive health in Africa and even the world over, these are issues that are under attack. But specifically for East Africa, we do not have substantive laws, legal frameworks that give effect to how we're going to reduce teenage pregnancies and how we're going to have assisted reproduction. So all these things are operating kind of in a vacuum. And so, we've tried at national level to pass this, these laws in Kenya twice, and that has failed. So, and a lot of parallels could be drawn, across East African countries. And so because there's that lack of a framework, Honorable Mukulia and his colleagues thought that it would be, great to have that at regional level.
What are the highlights of this bill?
So it talks about ending teenage pregnancies. It talks about menstrual hygiene. It talks about assisted reproduction. Talks about safe abortion, access to contraception. There's also the issue of forced sterilization, where HIV positive women are forcefully sterilized, and it seeks to end that. It seeks to end gender-based violence, FGM. So it's quite comprehensive. But when we talk about sexual and reproductive health and rights, we think it's a women and girls issue. But this, it's also a men and boys issue, and it's very clear in the bill that it also talks about issues of SRHR for men.
Okay. So by the time it's gone to the East African Legislative Assembly, the assumption is that each participative country has had these conversations for themselves, whether it be at their National Assembly level, their Senate level. Let's zero in on what Kenya then has done. Before it goes to IALA, there must have been conversations that took place in Kenya's either Senate or National Assembly.
Yeah.
Or let's just go National Assembly. What was the conversation that took place in Kenya then before it got to IALA?
Okay. So, I'll just start with just laying it down that the Constitution provides for reproductive health as a right. So it's not it's not a favor, it's actually our right. And because we have that constitutional provision, Parliament then has to make laws to effectuate it, right? In 2014, the then senator, who is now Ambassador Judith Sijeni, sponsored the Reproductive Health Bill of 2014. Unfortunately, that was shot down on the floor of the House. And, unsurprisingly, because Parliament's legislature is male-dominated, right? And there's a lot of issues to do with culture. But then, in 2019, Senator Susan Kihika also then came and sponsored a different bill, separate bill, but talking about the same issues, which was the Reproductive Health Bill of 2019. Unfortunately, that stalled on the floor of the House because of a technicality. But, then that exposes Kenyans to, what comes out of what comes with not having proper laws and proper frameworks around sexual and reproductive health. And we've seen the figures. Ministry of Health came out with shocking statistics that in 5 months, in a 5-month period, about 45,000 girls were getting pregnant. And, if you translate that, if you kind of unpack that, it translates to about 700 girls at the very least getting pregnant every day. And what's even more shocking is that they're saying 98 girls are getting infected with HIV every single week. This would not be the case if we had a solid framework which was being fully implemented.
Let's go into some of these details.
Right.
Because one of the first things that you said is ending teenage pregnancy. This is one of the things that's on that bill.
Right.
But at the same time, we're also talking about safe abortion. A flurry of other things. Now, it's going to sound like a weird question, but how are these 700 girls getting pregnant every day?
Good. So there's two factors, right? So on one hand, and we have to be, we have to face the reality. Teenagers are having sex, and they're having a lot of sex.
Unprotected sex.
Unprotected sex,
Yes.
exactly.
There will be no disease and no pregnancy if they were protected.
There you go.
Thank you.
So they are having sex. There's curiosity. You're at an age where your hormones are, you're going through adolescence and you're curious. So there's that factor where teenagers or adolescents are having, that kind of sex amongst themselves. But then on the other hand, there's also a lot of sexual violence and abuse and rapes, and so we look at it from those two angles.
Okay. What are the percentages? I mean, I want to hope that we've gone into the numbers and say, look, in order for us to do something about it, then we need to know what factors we're dealing with, right? On one side, if we know, yes, there's a curiosity that comes with adolescence and all of this, of these 700, what percentage then goes towards pregnancies that come out of that, or pregnancies that are a result of gender-based violence?
I don't think the Ministry of Health has kind of unpacked that and narrowed it down like that. But I think just holistically, it's a problem. So we have to have education. We have to give the adolescents proper education so that they're making responsible choices. We can't stop people from having sex. We can't go into bedrooms and police people. But we can give them the information that they need so that they make those responsible choices. Have protected sex, get onto contraception. But then on the other hand, we need the ministries, and I think I've also been a bit unfair to the Ministry of Health, because it's not just a Ministry of Health issue. It's a Ministry of Health issue. It's a Ministry of Education issue. It's a Ministry of even sports and culture. It's great we have the Kipchoges and they're doing amazing in the sports thing, but I think we always forget that this ministry is a ministry of sports and culture, and that culture aspect of it, we have to really bring that in, because it's harmful traditional practices and horrible cultures that are also perpetuating some of these figures. So I think the different ministries have to work in concert, as well, to tackle this and to also get that specific data that you're asking about.
The subject of reproductive health and issues around it is actually a very big topic. It's a big subject, because right now, HIV seems to have taken a position that can best be described as a backwater position when we're talking about diseases or health matters in this country. And yet there is a resurgence of HIV infection among young people, more specifically young women. Yes. So even if that legislation is passed, and we now have legislation that supposedly covers this very, very important subject, the problem has always been, how do you ensure that the people who are most likely at risk benefit from such legislation?
Yeah. And that's a valid point, because we keep saying in Kenya we have solid laws and policies. The issue then lies in the implementation of it.
Yes.
If you look at what's happening in Kenya, we don't have a strict adherence to the rule of law. There's a impunity. So if you look at the doctrine of separation of powers, where each arm of government is supposed to have checks and balances, to ensure that legislation is doing what they need to, the legislature rather, the judiciary and the executive. In Kenya, we have seen that, and I'm going to call it what it is. If we look at the president's nullification, the election nullification, President Kenyatta said, we're going to revisit this. That was a threat to the judiciary, meaning then the judiciary is not going to act independently. And that's what we're seeing in Kenya, where even on issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights, the judiciary has put out progressive rulings. The legislature has failed to do its part. The executive, who is supposed to implement this, is also failing to do the part. Now, with this bill, I think it kind of provides a remedy for that, because there's mechanisms. So each state, once this bill passes and becomes law, each state of the EAC is required to provide a status report every 2 years. And this report is going to be tabled in the Legislative Assembly. They're going to discuss it. And there's the East African Court of Justice. So, for example, Rwanda can say, Kenya, you guys are not doing what you're supposed to do. Mnaturudisha nyuma sana. And they sue Kenya at the EACJ, right? So there's that kind of accountability at regional level that we rarely get to see at national level. So I believe that, with this bill, there'll be that kind of push to get not just have the law in place, but have it work. So the implementation of it.
The framework I like, but then health and everything that goes with it falls under the ministry. Now, in the absence of adequate allocation of funds to ensure that these things are done, and also ensuring that the funds that are actually allocated are used for the purposes that they were intended for. This is really where my problem comes in. Because for the longest time, very many issues that have to do with reproductive health are funded. The Kenyan government does its bit, but they are funded. But over time, I'm being polite in my conversation here, yes. HIV was fully funded, not partially. Now, the preparedness that brings about the results that you envision would have to do with the government actually taking full responsibility of these particular issues, activities, and the funding. Do you see a situation where we will have the Kenyan government allocating adequate funds to meet these needs?
I absolutely agree with you. If you look at, I don't know if you've heard about the global gag rule. In the US, it kind of gets us to a place where our sexual and reproductive health as citizens of the global South are dependent on what's happening in the US or, in Western countries. So I absolutely agree with you that the government must increase budgetary allocation. 95% of what is spent on SRHR in Kenya alone comes from the US. So we definitely have to, have some conversations there around getting increased budgetary allocation on SRHR. And I think this is an amazing time that, we're discussing these issues, because we're going into election. Are we holding our leaders accountable as to issues to do with gender and reproductive justice when they come and ask for the votes? And, I'm going to also, plead with the Kenya Editors Guild to also include some of these questions in the gubernatorial debates and the presidential debates, because yes, it's great to talk about development. It's great to talk about agriculture and finance. But, could we also have some questions as to how the candidates, are going to prioritize these issues, including on resourcing them?
When it comes to all these matters of sexual and reproductive health rights, you've talked about the various attempts. The first attempt by the Honorable Sijanyi in the National Assembly, this other one by Susan Kihika. The kind of reaction that you have received, I'm sure, is not only unique to Kenya. If you go to all the 5 East African community states, you'll get similar reaction. So why take it to the East African Legislative Assembly if the partner states themselves cannot even have these conversations? Isn't that just showing us that we need to start somewhere else?
Well, I agree, but I think we also have a culture of not engaging with facts, right? So even if you look, I'm going to draw a parallel with election. If you look at election, we all say, if Flani na Flani, if so-and-so has said, basi tosha, right? We're not going to engage with the manifesto. If you look at BBI, people said, if Baba has read it, me, I'm good. And if said it passes, I'm good. We don't go further and say, okay, what is this BBI talking about? And that's what's happening. And what happened with the reproductive health bills is that the opposition, led by the Catholic Church, led by Western-funded organizations, came out and said this is an abortion bill. Right. And that's what we took. And that's what people take. So and that's why, we're working to come onto platforms like this so that we can unpack these bills, these laws, so that people understand, OK, fine. Yes, it talks about safe abortion, which is, sensitive, but it doesn't provide for abortion on demand, for example. It aligns exactly with the Constitution. But when it's termed as an abortion bill, it takes away from the true essence of it. So it's important that, we also have these conversations, like you say, to get people to engage with it. I think at the East African level, for me, it's just about the accountability, because at national level, we have failed on accountability. We have failed. If you look at our parliaments and how fast they pass bills, or pass laws that, benefit them financially. It's very fast. But the issue of reproductive health, 12 years since we passed the Constitution, and we're still counting, has yet to be effectuated,
You will also, of course, recognize that issue was a contentious issue even during the referendum of 2010.
Absolutely.
Those 35% or so who voted no, many of them were voting no because of this issue. So why don't we start by having a conversation, like a national conversation? People such as yourself, members of parliament, like-minded people, separate conversations. There's a conversation about sexual health and abortion. There's a conversation about reproductive rights. For example, like you said, assisted reproduction, with issues of surrogacy, IVF, and the others. Unpack those. Let people discuss those separately from those that are talking about abortion. Abortion is a contentious issue. Approach abortion in a different way so that we have a national conversation about abortion. When we bring in the facts, yes, we'll have the facts, and we have all those facts. Are teenagers, are people having sex? Yes. Underage or adults. Are people getting unwanted pregnancies? Yes. Are people procuring abortions? Yes. Are they procuring unsafe abortions? Yes. So we have those conversations, because I think it's important that we have that conversation. But if you go to the legislation side, history is showing us that we are not moving.
Right.
Even this bill itself in the EAC Legislative Assembly has had to be withdrawn so that they can discuss it further and add meat to it.
I do agree with you. We definitely have to have these conversations, and we have to have some difficult conversations. But Eric, I will remind you that it is not a favor, it is a right that is enshrined in the Constitution. Article 43 of the Constitution gives rights to reproductive health. Article 26(4) of the Constitution provides for certain circumstances where abortion is permitted. So whether we talk about it or not, whether we like it or not, it is the law. Right? Parliament could come and tell us that 50% tax now on income. And we can discuss it. Yes, everything. I think that the time for, talking about whether 50% tax is good or not is before. But once it passes and becomes law, then it is the law. Whether we like it or not, KRA will take away the 50%. And that is exactly what it is with SRHR. We have the Constitution. We are a party to the Maputo Protocol, which in Article 14 gives rights to reproductive health. We are a party to the CEDAW, and the same Constitution tells us that international law will form part of this law. Right? So all those treaties and conventions and protocols that Kenya has signed at international level become law of this country, and we are obliged to follow that. But even the Constitution, which is the Magna Carta, it's like the Bible, right, tells us that we have the right to reproductive health, tells us we have certain circumstances where we are permitted to seek abortion. So it is the law. And so we have to follow the law. That is what the rule of law is.
I agree with you.
Right.
Everybody needs to be on board. The law, is it human? What is it that you lawyers say? The law for man or man for law, right? Which one takes precedence? Do you want to have a law and then people are still complaining about the law? Or do you want to have a law where everybody says, yes, we agree, or at least a vast majority says yes?
But Eric, we did this before we passed the constitution. You said it yourself. It was a very contentious issue. There was a lot of consultation, right? Even with the East African legislative, this particular bill, it's coming up for public participation, where Kenyans and Ugandans and all the citizens across the community are able to put in their memoranda and say what it is about the law that they like, or what it is about the proposed law that they do not like. So there's that opportunity also to still have this discussion.
Let me put the cart before the horse here, just a little bit. Before it even goes for what you call public participation, which is, of course, required by law in this country, our constitution tells us that, there is the need to engage communities so that when this document is brought before them, they have an understanding of it. Now, that bit is what Eric was referring to, because if you want to bring people on board, you don't wait until the document is out and then present it. No. Start talking about the document even before they see it.
Right.
Are you saying this has been done?
It has been done. It has been done.
Okay. Tell me how it was done.
You have consultative meetings with the Ministry of Health. You have consultative meetings.
Not those ones. No, not those people. No,
Community.
No, community. No, not them.
No. Communities are brought in to have consultative meetings. So you have the church groups, faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, grassroots organizations. You have civil society organizations, human rights, different stakeholders, private sector. It's been there. We have gone mashinani.
You see, this was done.
It has been done. We continue to do it.
There's a reason why I'm belaboring this point.
Yes.
The moment you talk of groups being brought in, yes, it gives an impression that public participation has taken place. But in many ways, it hasn't quite. Because the assumption is that these groups are representatives of the views of the people whom they supposedly represent. My understanding and my experience is that many groups represent their interest, not necessarily the interest of the so-called people. The people are mentioned as a convenience to show that they have universality in the way they go about their business.
Okay.
Eric points out that abortion is a thorny subject. It is not going to stop being thorny.
No.
Now, until and unless, because it's a huge undertaking, it's not a small undertaking, and the ministry has to be at the center of it. But how do you get a conversation about, because the issue of abortion, the issue about HIV is, the discussion is actually about sex. Now, we have difficulties discussing sex as a Kenyan community.
Right.
Discuss sex and matters around it openly. So, anytime you bring about abortion becomes thornier because it's a manifestation of this very act that we don't like discussing.
Right.
So, it becomes a really big problem.
Right.
If it's HIV, it's even worse. So, what am I saying? I love the idea of talking with groups.
Yeah.
But there are groups of individuals, groups that deal with community work. That's what they do. Whether it's in the HIV field, whether it's even in reproductive health, okay? They all fall under the ministry because they all have to work with the county system, health being a devolved function. But until and unless we are certain that all these groups who deal with this work, because they are in touch with the so-called grassroots, they are. Until they are involved, and you can say, these are the reports that they have given us on this particular subject.
I mean,
Takuan, take a moment.
Right.
All right. And then you can respond to this, to what City is saying. Because I'd like us to take a break. 26 minutes to 8. Kenya's biggest conversation. Stephanie Musho is a human rights lawyer. We are talking about sexual and reproductive health rights across the East African community. There's a bill before the East African Legislative Assembly, the Sexual and Reproductive Health Bill 2021. We're talking about the progress that it's making and all.
This is The Situation Room the only way to start your day.
It continues. Our guest this morning, Stephanie Musho. She's a human rights lawyer. We are talking about the East African Sexual Reproductive Bill. Sexual Reproductive Health Bill 2021. That's before the Legislative Assembly. Concerns raised by CT before the break. And I told you just pause, take it in, draft your response. Now go.
I marinated on it.
Yes.
I'm going to push back. When you look at this issue of SRHR, there's organizations that have been working and continue to work. I understand what you're saying in terms of when you're having groups, they might just be advancing their interests. But, different organizations nationally and regionally have had different outreaches, even to the most remote areas. Because if you think of, Turkana, or you think of Takawiri Island, which was put in the newspaper the other day because they were having issues with access to maternal health, it means organizations are going out there. Organizations are doing it. People are being talked to, and these conversations are happening. You said it rightfully. We don't want to talk about sex. We don't want to talk about abortion, yet it continues to happen. So, yes, we have to have these conversations, but to what extent? And as we're having the conversations, should women and girls continue to suffer because we're waiting for everybody to get on board?
Actually, no. These organizations actually do the work, even as we speak now. Now, for those who don't know, Takawiri is an island next to Mfangano. It's one of those interesting islands that actually has white sand. It is a white sandy beach.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, the problem you speak of, I understand.
Yeah.
Remba Island, which is much further, had similar problems until a hospital was actually built, accommodation for members of staff. Prior to that, any health services used to be 3 times a week, and it was in a bar.
A bar?
Well, yeah, they don't function in the daytime. So,
Health services.
So during the day,
during the day, health services
Look
3
at
times a
space.
week. Evening, it was space, which was available. So I am saying that these organizations already work. Now, maybe what I'm actually trying to say has been done.
Yeah.
The data relating to these matters are collected on a daily basis by people who do this work, not as an outreach. They do this is what they do, and they've been doing it for a long time. Now, if we're saying that these are the organizations from whom we've got the data, then my discussion has come to an abrupt end on that particular subject, because then you have the quota that you require to do what you need to do.
Is it really saying that people are advocating for those that need the rights to have access to the rights today, to get their access to their rights today, but also just educating everybody on why the rights are important? Because I think there's that whole issue. If you look at these bills, if you look at the bill before the National Assembly that flopped, the one before the Senate that was kicked out on technicality, this one before the Legislative Assembly, all of them are trying to address the same thing, which is, like you've said, we are part of the international community. We have signed on to this, so they are part of our laws. However, communities view things differently. And like Siti was saying, when you talk about HIV, when you talk about abortion, you're talking about sex. When you talk about abortion specifically, why is it that there are very many people who also seek abortion? It's because the same conversation, I do not want to be seen to have had sex. There is the whole issue of, will I be able to take care of the child? But that is a secondary conversation. For very many young people, the first thing is, oh my God, this is evidence. I've got to erase the evidence of what I've been involved in. And we're not talking about those that have gotten pregnant because as a result of violence. Now, how do we bring that community to have these conversations openly? A bill, I support having these bills. Even the Susan Keheka bill, when she was here, we support having this bill. But I think we also need to have complementary mechanisms of having the conversation at the grassroots level.
No, I
if you've had conversations with the religious leaders, let them come out as champions openly and publicly. Let's
Yeah.
see religious leaders coming out to say, you know what, people, let's have this conversation. We don't see
And
them.
it shouldn't be a conversation that is taking place because there's a legislation afoot. It has to be a continuous discussion. Because with every generation, people are going to look at that same issue differently. But you need to have that community understand what we're talking about from a perspective that they can relate to. Okay? Now, if it is a top-down approach, which is how very many things are done, the public will give the impression they have understood, but what they have done is they've heard you. But that information is competing with other information that they have and priorities that they have. And usually, this message will come at the very bottom because it isn't life-threatening. It isn't something that they fear. It's something that they can deal with when it comes about. So how do you make this thing central?
Yeah.
This particular discussion, how do you make it central
Yeah.
to their discussion in a way that they can accommodate?
Right. I hear that, and I think I'm going to jump on this opportunity to, invite the social media community, because on Monday we're having a discussion on Twitter. So we're going to have a Twitter chat and we're going to have a Twitter space. So, anyone who's listening who's on Twitter is also very welcome to come and have that conversation. So, if we look at the penetration of mobiles and internet, I think a lot of people have that. So we can also start there. We can use technology and have people have those conversations. But I'm still going to push back and say that, these conversations have been had at community level, and, to just jump also on Eric's point that, it seems to be the majority, but it's not. Like you said, it was a 35% of the population who, were having an issue. So majority of the population.
Maybe. She just said there are people who voted because Baba said it.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, guys, absolutely. Let's talk about it. Let's jump on that Twitter space and Twitter chat and engage.
Stephanie, I mean, because this kind of subject matter requires the subjective and the emotional, which, unlike very many other bills that come before any legislative assembly, whether it's, national parliament or then now regional parliaments, as we're talking about, that many others come and it's brick and mortar. It is very clear. These are the lines we're coloring within. Let's move. But this is emotive. And that normally happens every time that you invite anything that is cultural and traditional at the same time, right? It's bound to happen. In these conversations that we're having around, look, I would dare say that for very many people, the molestation or abuse of a child is not something that is going to be taken lightly. There are mechanisms, for example, in the traditional setting that are used to handle these issues. So then I wouldn't believe that if it was something that was going to be put in law as to the protections of these children, that anybody would oppose it. Right? Probably welcome it with open arms and say, look, we need to then see that something else be done. But when now you're talking about other things as per a child's morality, or rather morality that parents hold in such high esteem and in high regard, that's when we start to get a bit, it gets a bit blurry. What has been the understanding, or what has been that, if there has been a collective position across the board, then say, okay, actually, it's time that we ought to do something about this, so that in the event that this passes at IALA, essentially what we're saying is that it become law in all of these countries. From where you are right now, in an honest position, do you think that then there would be adherence to it just because it would become a law?
Truthfully, we have a long way to go, right? And I think the first step of that is to institute the framework. So yes, let's start with the law. Let's also then work on training the different people you're saying, even at community level, right? The chief, who would be like the first point person if a child, for example, is molested, would also have to, get on board. Like we've been having this conversation of having everybody aligned. I think small wins towards a bigger win. If you look at slavery in the US, it took 200 years. So we're not going to see immediate results. But I think for my daughter, who I came to studio with, I think this would be an amazing, I know, it would be something great for her, and for her kids. we have to start from somewhere, I would say.
There are other aspects of this bill, like on the assisted reproduction. Yeah, take us through that.
Yeah. So, the issue of assisted reproduction, and, I'm coming in from a very Kenyan point of view because this is the space within which I operate. The statistics are showing us that about 4.2 million, and these are figures from the Kenya Fertility Society, that about 4.2 million Kenyans need some sort of assistance with reproduction. And this is men and women, right? As it is, IVF, in vitro fertilization, happens. I mean, it's there, it's privatized, but it's too expensive. Around could be about 150,000 to 300,000. Yeah. This is out of reach, even for me, as a middle class Kenyan. So, that really locks out families who are really trying to reproduce. So, when we have this bill, it seeks to have different governments provide for assisted reproduction at a public level, right? So you can walk into Kenyatta Hospital and get your IVF that's super affordable and it's good quality, okay? Now, if we look at the issue of surrogacy, it's quite contentious, but as it is in Kenya, we have two rulings, and both of them are by Honorable Justice Lenaola. And, they say that the position is that if you take my egg and you take my partner's sperm and we put it in a surrogate, that child belongs to the surrogate until a point where we adopt that child. So you can imagine, I'm adopting my own child.
Yep.
You know how long court processes take in Kenya, how long the adoption process takes in Kenya. You have child services coming to your home to check if you are suitable to adopt your own child. Right?
Your biological
child. So that has to change. What happens when the surrogate mother says, no, I've changed my mind.
So first of all, is surrogacy allowed in Kenya?
There's no law. There's no substantive law on it. It's operating in a vacuum. So the issue of assisted reproduction is operating in a vacuum.
If a medical professional goes through this procedure of taking a woman's egg and a man's sperm and then fertilizing them in another woman's womb, is that legal?
It is legal because if we're going through case law, with Justice Lenaola's rulings, then you have to then go and adopt, right? So there's that vague thing going on there. It's not, no one is going to come and arrest you, but we'll have to follow that precedence that has been set.
Let me ask you this question. Is there a reluctance of lawmakers and our judiciary to actually put a stamp on this thing and create laws that give you clear guidelines as to what you should do? Because we have so many laws. We pass so many laws. We are always dealing with this and the other. You're telling me something as fundamental as this is in a vacuum.
Right. And that's the whole point. That's why we need this. And that's why we need to hold our leaders to account. That's why before the elections, we need to tell them, okay, fine, you're going to bring water tanks, but what are you going to do about this fundamental issue? That's why we need to have these questions come up in the debates. That's why we have to ask our leaders on social media, what are you going to do in the next parliament on these issues of assisted reproduction? The opposition comes and says, this whole thing of contraception or safe or abortion or whatever is destroying the moral fabric of society and is killing families. Yet at the same time, we have families who are really trying to build their families.
They're trying to get a baby.
Yeah. So, it's kind of...
How does morality come into it?
I think it's a culture thing. It just goes back to culture. Yet, if you go back to our traditional cultures, I know of communities where if I was unable to get a baby, then I marry another woman to help me get that baby.
Well, I mean, look at the Bible. Look at one of the most famous stories of Hagar and what happened there in terms of you bring on a maidservant who will then, have a child by your husband if you are not able to conceive.
Right.
So, I mean, and it still happens to date. Today.
Actually, even
it still happens.
There are communities where a relative who has more children than they know what to do with will bequeath you one or two.
The issue, though,
essentially
is
give you.
In that case, CT, that is adoption. So here is an issue of surrogacy where you, as the mother, you want to be recognized as the legal mother of this child.
Your
right?
child.
And it is yours.
And it is
actually
yours anyway.
That's right.
Came from your egg. Now, it is as recognition. Now, I see where this law, I mean, like you're saying, 4.2 million?
4.2 million, and that's just in Kenya.
4.2 million people in Kenya who are sitting here and they're looking for ways in which they can actually get babies and get their own babies. It's a big one.
You know, it is even bigger because we are focusing on women, and yet men are an integral part of this
Absolutely.
discussion.
You're right.
Absolutely.
Because when there's an issue about not having children, you assume there's something wrong with the woman, and that's not
And in
true.
many cases, it's
Yes.
not the issue.
Male reproductive health issues.
There you go.
as well.
There you go.
Which is why I come back to what I was asking. Why don't we separate these two?
The issue of
Assisted reproduction, discuss that, let that get passed, let the 4.2 start enjoying their rights in law, and then this other one that is still contentious, discuss it and bring it. Because you see, now we are throwing the baby with the bathwater.
I think we would be campaigning and we would be in parliament for the rest of our lives.
That's okay.
No, it's not okay, because as that's happening, people will continue to suffer.
But you just said,
Reproductive health rights are all encompassing.
you just said, Stephanie.
Yeah.
This will be a continuous fight. It is not. We are not going to wake up one day and have these rights realized
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
So let's have them incrementally.
No, but the thing is, we can't talk about sexual and reproductive health in silos. They do not operate in silos, because even that person who needs assisted reproduction will need a facility. Yeah, we're being told by city during the day, hospital, during the night, bar.
No,
Yeah.
No, it's the other way around.
No, it's during the day.
During the day
During the day
hospital,
hospital.
during the night
yeah,
bar.
yeah.
You will make more money if you sell alcohol at night. Daytime can be tricky.
I agree, though. So yeah, they don't operate in silos, right? They're all kind of
They're
intertwined.
incremental gains.
Yeah,
That's
I
all-
agree.
That's the point
I
I'm
agree.
making.
No,
Article
I agree.
43, even those judges have said, already there's some rights
Yeah.
that we can realize immediately,
Right.
that we can demand for immediately.
Yeah.
And there's some rights that will be progressive.
Yeah.
So why don't you just have the same approach?
I mean, I agree there
As
are
we have the
incremental
push
gains.
for example, better access to reproductive information, better access to sex education in schools, introduction of such, and then let's have into that big major conversation of, all right, now people, this is how we shall legalize abortion, or we shall legislate and regulate abortion in this country.
Well, first of all, abortion is permitted in certain cases, so it's not about legalizing.
I'm saying
but-
regulation of abortion.
Yeah. But I think, I still maintain the fact that these issues do not operate in silos, and it's urgent. This is urgent, right? If we're going and saying, okay, today we are talking about teenage pregnancies alone, and tomorrow we'll then discuss assisted reproduction and so on and so forth. These numbers that we're seeing will continue to grow.
What's happening now at the Assembly, and what are we looking at in terms of timelines?
Right.
then moving
So,
forward?
we're coming up for public participation, and this is the 26th of June to the 3rd of July. So it's a very small window. The East African community put out a memo sending to the different partner states to send certain groups of people to provide, their input as to what the bill is. So currently, that's what we're looking at. But again, like I said, I'm going to jump on this and invite guys to come onto Twitter so that we have the discussion. And it's not going to be one-sided. Let's have all views, like we said, yeah? It's important. But I will say that we're not going to look at issues of reproductive health as standalones, and we're not going to delay the issue any further.
Okay. So then after that stage, then they go back now to
They go and vote.
Third reading.
Third reading.
Okay. If it passes, does it become law in Kenya automatically?
It becomes law.
Do we need to pass another law in Kenya?
No, it becomes law, and now the different ministries will then have to. So one thing it says is that sexual and reproductive health will then must be included in each country's universal health coverage, plans. So we're looking forward to that.
Okay. Stephanie, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a good and interesting conversation. Stephanie Musho is a human rights lawyer. We've been talking about the Sexual and Reproductive Health Bill 2021 that's before the East African Legislative Assembly, bringing back that whole conversation that we've had in this country many times. Remember Senator Keheka's bill? It received the kind of backlash that it received, but we need to have these conversations as a society, as a community, as a country.